Jazakallah for everyone joining today's program. That's another episode from our weekly series of Tabligh Talk. Today we have Dr. Umar with us, and he'll be talking about the signs in Quran and Sharif about and how we can use those signs to prove the existence of Allah Ta'ala. So before we start, if I can uh, hand over to Dr. Umar. Uh, and then he can have so the format going to be, we're going to have a talk of about 25-30 minutes, and then we have a session for question answer. So if you have any questions, you can put them in chat, or if you message one of the co-hosts, we can then take your questions, and Dr. Umar will be answering your question at the end of this session. Dr. Umar, all yours.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Jazakallah for that. Jazakallah for inviting me and for having me on here. So today we're going to be talking about the Quranic, the scientific prophecies in the Holy Quran and how you can prove the existence of God from them. Can I just confirm with with the organisers if they can just let me know if my audio is fine and there's no issues with it?
There's a slight kind of like background noise, but it's fine.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can do that. Actually, let me quickly. I think I can actually do something.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Is that any better?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fine. Carry on.
Okay, I put suppressing background noise on high, so my voice might sound a bit processed, but I'm sure it'll be audible. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share a presentation with you. Okay. Can I confirm that you can see my screen and that it's full screen at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, exactly. So today we're going to be discussing this, so Quranic prophecies of modern scientific discoveries. And as a small introduction, I'm part of a Rational Religion team, which is under the Belief Department, National Belief Department in the UK. And we're a platform that focuses on issues relating to atheism, issues relating to the Holy Quran and science, as well as more social and economic things as well. We have a website, rationalreligion.co.uk, as well as our YouTube channel. If you just type in Rational Religion, and we have all the normal social media handles as well. If you use our name, you should be able to find us. So that's kind of where we're coming from. And I want to cover a few different things. And the reason why this is important is because the narrative which we're told is that the science has done away with science has done away with religion, and that to be religious is to be anti-reason and anti-science. Now, a few weeks ago, I gave a talk on how modern scientific discoveries indicate the existence of God, but the indication of the existence of God, saying that there must be a God or there should be a God, is not the same as a higher level of confirmation that you can get from revelation. And obviously, personal revelation is the highest level once it reaches a certain degree and quantity. But also, the revelation of the Holy Quran is a very powerful proof of the existence of God. That God exists. So, if we are able to find statements in the Holy Quran which describe modern scientific discoveries, and we're quite sure about these scientific discoveries, and the Quran discusses them in a way which seems implausible for it to have been the word of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. The Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, was in 7th century Arabia. He couldn't read or write. He wasn't a scholar, and the scholarship of the time had no idea about the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about. So if you can show that actually these statements in the Quran, which are relating to scientific phenomena, to natural phenomena, are actually very accurate and very surprising and completely different to what people thought at that time, then that itself is an excellent proof of the existence of God. And this is, of course, the Holy Quran, revealed 1400 years ago, and its age should make us reflect upon its divine origin, that there are so many secrets that were kept in this book. And Allah talks about this. He says that, right at the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, in the name of Allah, most gracious, ever merciful, I am Allah, most knowledgeable. This is what the words mean. Alif Lam Mim. This is that perfect book. There is no doubt in it. It is a guidance for the righteous. So God Almighty here is saying that this book, he makes a resounding statement at the beginning that this book is from Allah, who knows everything, and that this is a perfect book with all perfect guidance, and that there's no doubt in it. So you may think there is a doubt according to the current knowledge of the time, but actually all of these things which you doubt will become progressively proven true. So the first domain which we're going to speak about is cosmology. If I could ask the organizers just to let me know sort of 5 minutes before you want me to wrap it up, and I'll kind of bring it to a close around then. So cosmology is obviously the study of the heavens, essentially, and space, and how space came to be in the way it was. And we know the dominant theory of our time, the paradigm in which we work, is called Big Bang Cosmology. And we used to think that the universe, or many people used to think that the universe has always existed, and that you didn't need any eternal being to start it off. But then we found out, because of Einstein's field equations and the work of Georges Lemaitre and various astronomers who helped confirm Einstein's discoveries, that the universe is expanding. They found that the universe is expanding. And this guy, this Belgian priest called Georges Lemaitre, what he did was he said, well, if this balloon, if you will, if this universal balloon is expanding, if I rewind the clock, it must have come from a single point. And so he said that there must have been a primeval atom at the beginning, and the universe exploded out from there. And he was initially kind of thought to be a little bit left field and a little bit strange, and a lot of people didn't want to believe it. But the evidence came in, and it was very strong evidence. And then over 60 years, basically, you had this whole idea being confirmed in many tests, that this, as far as we can tell, according to multiple different lines of evidence, is true, that actually the universe expanded from a very small, dense state. Okay. Now, what does the Holy Quran say about this? It says, "Do not those who disbelieve see that the heavens and the earth were a closed-up mass, and then we opened them out, and we made from water every living thing." And if you just take a second, just reread that, because I think it's a very incredible statement. So that's in chapter 21, and it says a few things here. It says that the universe came from a ratkan, or a ratak. So this is the word used, ratkan, which means essentially the healing of a stitch, or something which is closed up, something which is homogeneous in its nature. And one particular lexicon, I think Lisan al-Arab, actually says that this has a connotation of darkness as well. So essentially we're talking about a mass of some sort, some kind of mass, some kind of entity, which is very closed up, which is homogeneous, and which is dark. And then it says that we opened them out. We made from water every living thing. So it says the universe came from this mass. It's a non-Muslim discovery, and obviously it was Einstein and this Belgian priest who are the people who discovered this, the disbelievers from the Muslim perspective. And that also life came from water. Now this is an amazing verse, because it has so much information in it, expressed so concisely, and it contains the essential elements of modern Big Bang cosmology. And if that wasn't enough, if the Big Bang wasn't enough, it then says that all living things came from water. Now, on our website, rationalreligion.co.uk, we have an article about this, and we describe how the theories at the time cannot possibly explain this. The Egyptian theories, the Sumerian theories, all of those things do not contain anything that we see here, and that this is an incredibly shocking and surprising description. And I said about the water, and this is an article from a few years ago now, and this is just to demonstrate that when we now look for planets that could have life, we look for water, surface water. So NASA finds 715 new planets, and that includes 4 planets that could hold liquid surface water, believed to be the key for life. So I mean, this verse is amazing, because it has so many different things in it, and then just sort of, just the Big Bang element of it would be surprising enough and convincing enough that actually, this must be from God. But then it also talks about the water thing as an extra. And what the link is between these two, to our current eyes, doesn't seem, at least to my eyes, isn't super obvious. But it's something that requires more thought. Why did Allah put this right next to this verse about the Big Bang? Is there a secret that's hidden therein? So that's something we can continue to think about. Now, I spoke about the expansion of the universe and how that's actually how we discovered and how we understood that the universe had some kind of beginning, some kind of dense homogeneous mass at the beginning. And the Holy Quran also speaks about this. It says, "And the heaven we built with our own powers, and indeed we go on expanding it." And that's in chapter 51. So it says, "The heaven we built with our own powers, and indeed we go on expanding it." So if you look at the Arabic, that's the actual meaning, that we go on expanding it. So it doesn't just say that the universe has expanded in the past. It says that it's continuing to expand. And this is actually something which we've only really appreciated the depth of in the last 30 years. I think it was in the 90s when a lot of dark energy stuff really started to be cemented. So what they found was that not only has the universe expanded in the past, they found that it expanded. They think it then slowed down for a bit, but then it actually sped up. And at the moment, the rate of expansion of the universe is speeding up. And they attribute this to a force which is, it's a mysterious force. No one really knows what's actually expanding the universe, but it's given the name dark energy. It's dark because it's invisible, it's immaterial. We don't know what its nature is and what is actually pushing the universe outwards. So Allah is saying here that we go on expanding it. And again, that's true. And it has also been, and obviously the meaning there is, if Allah is going on expanding it, it means that it's also been expanded in the past. Now, again, I want you to think about this verse because, you know, from a common sense point of view, this is very weird. It doesn't really make sense that God is continuing to expand the universe. God is continuing to make it bigger. Your intuitive sense of the world is that it's still and that things are settled. And you don't really have any kind of appreciation that even the, you know, from here to here, there is space-time which is expanding. But actually, that's what's happening, very bizarrely. That you have that the underlying fabric of the universe and the way the universe is built is continuing to get bigger. And that's something which the Quran says as well. So if we then reflect upon this, you know, could the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, have just said this by himself? You know, where did this come from? This isn't in any kind of ancient theories. You know, even those ancient theories have so many weird things, and they don't have these kinds of things. So you can't explain it via that. Could you have guessed it? I mean, no one would guess this. This is extremely bizarre that this is actually happening. And you couple this with what the Quran said about the Big Bang, and even for me, you know, even just these few verses are a wonderful proof of the Holy Quran. So let's go on. I seem to have somehow ruined my scrolling. Let's use the arrows. Okay, so I'm going to now pose this section of verses talking about how the Holy Quran describes the end of the universe. And this is something we haven't confirmed yet. We don't really, well, in a sense, we'll never be able to confirm until that happens, in which case it'll be bad news for us. But what we can do is we can have, you know, theories about what we think is the most likely end result and end point of the universe. And this is what the Holy Quran says. It says, "Remember the day when we shall roll up the heavens like the rolling up of written scrolls by a scribe. As we began the first creation, so shall we repeat it." So it says, remember the day, and Allah also often talks about things in the future to our perspective as if they're in the past, because they are in the past essentially from his perspective, in the sense that they have been settled and they are definite. So they're not in the past in the sense that he's only at one point in time. He has access to the whole of the timeline, but he speaks about them in the past to indicate that they are settled. So Allah says, remember the day when we shall roll up the heavens like the rolling up of written scrolls by a scribe. As we began the first creation, so shall we repeat it. This is actually in the future anyway. So it says that like the written scrolls of a scribe, the universe will be rolled up. And if you take a piece of paper and, you know, you turn it into like a scroll and you crunch it up like that, you'll see at the end you have this kind of swirl that the paper makes like that. And this is an artist's depiction of a black hole. And I've just put this up here because one of the major theories is that the universe will essentially collapse in on itself. And when it does that, it'll do so via a mechanism like this. And if you look, you have these swirls coming out from the center. And you can see that these kind of swirls are also, you know, the way you would describe this, especially if you don't have graphics or you don't have modern technology or modern vernacular, is that the written scrolls of a scribe is actually a very good description of how the things come towards the center, and that's because of that angular momentum that you make that pattern. But then the Quran says something amazing, which says, "As we began the first creation, so shall we repeat it." So it's indicating that actually, in some way, our material existence will be repeated in another way, or maybe something from our material existence will be extracted and turned into something else. You know, we can't say, or I can't say for definite, what the exact interpretation of this is. But it's a very interesting verse because it's saying that the universe is going to, it's indicating it'll be collapsing or be rolled up and then it'll emerge in a new form. And that's something which actually modern cosmology doesn't really agree with. Although there's a lot of uncertainty in this area, generally there's a view that there's a very good chance it's just going to keep on expanding. And you're just going to have it blowing out and it's going to just, you know, go towards something like the big freeze. But that's, again, it's not something that people have definite knowledge of because we don't know the rate of dark energy, we don't know how it's changing, we don't know what that expansion is going to look like, and there are lots of other factors. But this is something the Quran is saying, is that ultimately you will have a collapse. And I suspect or hope in our own lifetimes we will potentially see more and more evidence in favor of this. And this is the article I was mentioning, Big Bang Cosmology in the Quran, a response to atheist objections. So you'll be able to see this article there, and it goes through these verses in quite some detail. Now, we've spoken about space a lot, and we've spoken about how there is this big universe, and it's full of planets, and it's expanding, etc. And the question which we've always had is, you know, or at least the modern man has had is there any life out there? Are we alone in this universe? And the idea of extraterrestrial life has been seen as really in the domain of science fiction. But this is something which is becoming more and more mainstream in many respects. Because if you look at, for instance, even the Pentagon in America, they actually declassified a bunch of videos which people have called UFOs, and the Pentagon haven't contradicted that. And there's lots of testimonies about this coming out now, and they've set up a specific committees and forces for these things. I'm not saying they are necessarily UFOs, but they're worth investigating. But a lot of this kind of discussion is really heating up in the world at the moment. And it's only about 120 years ago that people really started to publicly entertain the ideas in various science fiction writings of, I think, H.G. Wells and other people like that. But amazingly, the Holy Quran actually talks about this idea. You know, inshallah, it won't be like this where we have our cycles abducted. But, you know, is it possible that we're actually going to come into that there is life out there? And if so, will we have any contact with it? You know, that's the question that we have about this. And every time you look up in the night sky, you have this question: is some alien kid looking out back at me? You know, I always used to think that when I was a bit younger. You know, is there some other alien child on another planet that's thinking about whether there's life out there? Very interesting to entertain. Amazingly, the Holy Quran actually talks about this. And it's not just in one or two verses, it actually talks about it or alludes to it in several verses, and it explicitly talks about it in a few. And this is probably the most explicit mention. And it's in chapter 42. And Allah says, "And among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and of whatever living creatures he has spread forth in both. And he has the power to gather them together when he pleases." So he says, among his signs, so these are things which you will be able to witness and verify as being true, is the creation of the heavens and the earth. Okay, well, we can witness that as being real, and there are so many signs in that creation. And of whatever living creatures he has spread forth in both the heavens and the earth. Well, that's very interesting, because it's saying whatever living creatures he has spread forth in the earth we know about, but in the heavens? Are there living creatures in the heavens? I mean, that's quite a surprising statement of the Holy Quran. And if you look at the Arabic, the words used is darba, which basically means a terrestrial land-dwelling animal. You can't refer to angels. You would refer to them like this. It doesn't refer to spiritual beings. It refers to physical, material beings that live on the ground, that are terrestrial. So this is saying that it's the creation among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and whatever living creatures he has spread forth in both the heavens and the earth. And then it says, and he has the power to gather them together when he pleases. So Allah is saying that he has the power to gather together his living creatures spread forth in the heavens and the earth when he pleases. So essentially he's hinting here that we will come into some form of communication or interaction with these aliens, because otherwise, why would God mention it, and why would He mention it as being, in the context of talking about His signs? So He says He has the power to gather them together when He pleases. And the word there used means some kind of interaction or communication. It can just mean at a distance, but it can also mean literally and physically interacting with each other. So we'll see. I mean, inshallah, this happens soon. I'm not sure humanity's quite ready for that, but maybe we'll never be ready. But this is an amazing statement of the Holy Quran. And the Prophet of peace be upon him, while commenting on another verse of the Quran, because as I said, there isn't just one verse that talks about this. He said, the dwellers, he said, translating this verse, the dwellers of the heaven and the dwellers of the earth glorify Him. From Sai says, this is an indication that the heavenly bodies are also populated and their dwellers follow divine guidance. So he's saying this is an indication that the heavenly bodies, the planets out there, are populated and their dwellers follow divine guidance, which means that they are intelligent life, they have communication, they have language, and they also have enjoyed revelation, and they have religion. So this is an amazing prophecy of the Holy Quran, that it talks about these things. And a different verse actually even talks about the fact that they receive revelation, as well as this one as well. So there's a lot in the Quran about this. There are several different verses which talk about this. And again, is this book really from the Prophet Muhammad himself? Did he really just write this and say this? Is he really talking about aliens and the Big Bang and the expansion of the universe? This is something that atheists need to consider carefully. In my eyes, how can anyone other than the creator of the universe have revealed this at that time? This is extraordinarily powerful things that the Holy Quran is talking about. And even this has not been fully fulfilled yet. We don't know if there's alien life out there. But even the fact that the idea was being discussed when it's only really being discussed in modern day is something which is amazing. Even that is indication of the divine origin of this book, that it's even talking about these things and considering these things. And as I say, this wasn't something which was discussed in antiquity at all. It was discussed a little bit by the ancient Greeks, but it was in a completely different context, and it wasn't in this respect. So we actually have an article on this as well. And that's the philosophy of teachings of Islam, that quote. And this article is called First Contact, How the Quran Predicted Alien Life 1400 Years Ago. So go on to our website, rationalreligion.co.uk. We have an article discussing this. But yeah, I think that's an extremely exciting, some extremely exciting verses of the Holy Quran, and an amazing indication of its divine source. So we'll move off cosmology, and we'll move on to biology. So should we go for geology first? Or biology? Okay. So biological world is obviously the world of life that surrounds us on this planet. And it's often provoked many questions. Where did life come from? How did it begin? Were we created originally in this form, or did we evolve from a lower form? These are questions that many people ask, and have always asked in some respects. And the Quran itself sheds a lot of light on this, and it talks about this. And a lot of people think that the only things that religions say about this is, that man was made from clay, and this means that God is like a potter, and he kind of just got some clay like this person in the graphic and put it together, and that's how you made humanity, and everything was just kind of molded. But actually, when you look at how the Quran talks about how life started and the origin of life and the origin of man, it talks about this issue in a much more nuanced and sophisticated way. And I think people would do well to sort of look at that. And it has many different verses when it talks about the origin of life from clay. It says, and he began the creation of man. So he began the creation of man from din, from clay. In another verse, he says, he created man from dry, ringing clay, which is like baked pottery. So in this verse, it's saying that he created man from dry clay, which is like baked pottery. And surely we created man from dry, ringing clay, from black mud wrought into shape. So this is a different verse where God is saying, yes, we created you from dry, ringing clay, but also from black mud wrought into shape. And it links these two things, the dry, ringing clay and the black mud wrought into shape. So if you put this together, and you think about the different kind of things that God is saying here, he's alluding to different types of earth, different types of clay materials, some dry and some wet, and saying that actually we went through different phases. We went through a wet phase and we went through a dry phase. And the amazing thing is that the most modern theories of the origin of life have this specific thing in mind. They say that actually clay is necessary for the origin of biological material to appear, because clay has a ton of incredible qualities. You know, it's one of the most absorbent materials on Earth. It has tiny nano layers, and tons of water can gather within these nano layers. And within that water, within that sort of solvent, I guess, you can have the chemical reactions that you need in order to produce the first constituents which are involved in a basic cell in life itself. So you need clay, and you need something with the qualities of clay to have produced even the basic qualities of life. But the problem is that if you do it in water, you need to get rid of the water molecules. So, but if you do it in a dry material, you need the water as a solvent. So it's a big riddle, the paradox of the need of water, but also you need to have dry reactions. And how this happened, how could this possibly happen, has been a big headache for many people in this field. And as I say, one of the latest theories, and it has been growing for many decades, and Khalifa Rabi spoke about it, but it's actually developed in recent years, even the last 5 to 10 years, is this idea of in early pools, in early, potentially volcanic pools, you had areas of clay which were alternately wet and then dried by incoming water, and that you had the reactions taking place in different ways in the different phases of moisture. So this is something that we're writing something on Rational Religion, and inshallah going to release it so probably in a few months. So hopefully look out for it then. But it's an incredibly interesting area, and the fact that the Holy Quran talks about these different phases of clay is extremely interesting. So it's a far cry from the kind of caricature that God just is like a potter and he's just sort of made you, and then here you are. The Quran is actually giving you specific details which are only now coming through. And again, I would say, how could the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, have known this, the role of clay, the role of the wet and dry phases? And I'm sure as we look into these verses more, we'll find more details and more specifics in them. And just so you know, I'm not making all this stuff up. Here's one article about it, and this is the enhanced transcription. This is in Nature. The enhanced is in Nature or Science. I can't quite remember, but you can look that up if you want. The enhanced transcription and translation in, I think it's Nature, in clay hydrogel and implications for early life evolution. And this is this is just an example to show that this is a major thing which people speak about, is the clay materials that are needed for early life evolution. Taken together, they say our results support the importance of localized concentration and protection of biomolecules in early life evolution, and implicate a clay hydrogel environment for biochemical reactions during early life evolution. And this is just one paper. There's many of them on this. So next, we'll talk about evolution. And how did we get here? Did we go through different phases to reach us? Is it what the modern Darwinian theory is, which is that we came from primates like ancestors, not that different from chimpanzees, orangutans, or monkeys even? How did we get here? And that's a big question. And I want to share with you this interesting quote. This is from a book in 1874. And the context of why I'm sharing this is because a lot of people think that evolution is a very modern idea, that Darwin invented it, and we have him to thank for the whole idea, and everything he says is right. None of those things are true. He didn't invent the idea, and not everything he said was right by a long shot. In fact, his grandfather actually spoke about the idea, and many people before him had spoke about it. But the idea actually, as far as I can tell from our research and our team, really only took form in the Islamic era. And that may just sound like a wild claim, but this is a very interesting book from Draper, John William Draper. It's a book from 1874 called The History of the Conflict Between Science and Religion. And in this, he has a very revealing quote. He says, theological authorities were therefore constrained. Theological authorities were therefore constrained to look with disfavor on any attempt to carry back the origin of the earth to an epoch indefinitely remote, and on the Muhammadan theory of the evolution of man from lower forms, or his gradual development to his present condition in the long lapse of time. So Muhammadan is what the Europeans used to call Muslims before they knew any Muslims. So that's why they've used that word. And they've said that he is here saying that the church basically were annoyed at the idea of the Muslim idea of the evolution of man from lower forms or his gradual development to the present condition in a long lapse of time. Now, we know the Europeans, especially historically, were not particularly kind to Muslim history, and often, underrated the advances made by the Muslims. So he wouldn't have said this if this was just something which was something he was making up. This obviously indicates that at that time there was knowledge of this, and we know this now. We know that evolution was spoken about in various different ways by various different Muslims. The Ikhwan as-Safa, the Brethren of Purity, as they were called, which was basically a group of scholars about 1,000 or so years ago, spoke about this. Rumi spoke about evolution. Ibn Khaldun spoke about revolution. Al-Jahid spoke about evolution, all in their slightly different ways. But the basic idea was that man evolved from more primitive forms. That doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with Darwin's idea of one universal common ancestor becoming everything, and that we were primates in a way before becoming human. But it indicates that species came from more primitive, earlier forms. And of course, the big difference between the modern theory of evolution and the Islamic theory of evolution is that, in our view, this was guided by God, whereas in the modern view of evolution, it was not guided by God. It was just it's just happened by undirected natural forces of random variation and natural selection. And the point I want to make here is that this wasn't a coincidence that the Muslims spoke about this. It's in the Quran. They said, and the Holy Quran says in chapter 71, "What is the matter with you that you do not ascribe dignity to Allah? And certainly He has created you in stages." In atwaran is the word, which means stages, which means different forms and different conditions. Then a few verses later, it says, "Allah has raised you from the earth like the raising of vegetation." So as vegetation grows from a seed and it becomes, it sprouts out and then it gradually becomes bigger over a period of time, Allah is saying that in the same way we have developed from something which is small and something which is primitive and have reached our current state here, and that we've been created and produced in stages. And there are other verses which speak about this as well. So this is very interesting, and it's a challenge for us and a challenge for the world is to think about how our evolution really happened, because I think the current theories are quite unsatisfactory. Maybe there's a lot of insight actually in these verses if we analyze them. What is our relationship to vegetation, and why is this specifically being mentioned? Is it just a metaphor, or is there something else to it? Are we genetically linked in some way? These are good questions. But the point is, again, is that if this book was the book of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and not the book of God, then how would he know these things? How would he start to describe these things, such that people for the first time started to really speak about biological evolution? So this is again an amazing reference, and there are several in the Holy Quran. And on our website, Rational Religion, actually on our YouTube channel, we have a whole playlist where we talk about evolution, we critique the modern theories, and we speak about the Islamic history. So YouTube, Rational Religion, Evolution, you should find our playlist, and you should check it out if you want to know more about this. And this is another verse. Allah says, "And thy Lord creates whatever he pleases and selects. It is not for them to select. Glorified be Allah, far is he above all that they associate with him." So the modern day scientist believes very strongly in natural selection and thinks that can explain everything. But natural selection is itself a blind process. It's a culling process. It's not a creative process. So it itself cannot account for any kind of course of evolution, from reducing complexity to increasing complexity and consciousness. So Allah says that he is the one who creates and he is the one who selects. So he is the one who produces your variation. He's the one that selects whatever he wants to continue onwards. And it is not for them to select. Glorified is Allah, far above that which they associate with him. The atheists think that they can ascribe these creative powers to dead forces and to unintelligent forces. But Allah is here reminding them that you'll never be able to do that coherently. if you want to produce increasing complexity and consciousness, then you're going to need an intelligent creative process. And Allah is saying that He is the one who takes care of the entire process, and has put into and has guided those mechanisms. So this is obviously in contrast to the modern contemporary view of evolution, but I think that's to the detriment of the modern contemporary view rather than the Quran's view. So as I say, this is the playlist that we have if anyone wants to learn more about this. So that's taken me to about half an hour. I'm just going to finish on this this one last section on embryology, and then we'll finish. Obviously, embryology is itself something which is embryology describes how we develop in the womb. You know, from an embryo, from our two sex cells, from the gametes, they fertilize and they produce your embryo, then that produces your fetus, right? So this whole topic is one that's shrouded in mystery until the modern day, because you couldn't really, you can open a pregnant woman up and at various different stages and figure out what's going on. That'll be murder of two people actually. So it's, people haven't done that. So a lot of it was guesswork in the past, and a lot of embryology was obviously wildly wrong. But the Holy Quran speaks about this. It says, "Verily we made man from an extract of clay, then we placed him as a nutfa in a safe depository." And the words here are very interesting. This word nutfa, so this is sperm. This word nutfa is a very interesting word, because if you look at where it is used otherwise in the Quran, one of the mentions is that is nutfatin amshajin, which means a nutfa made of multiple mixtures. So when you think about what a nutfa is, it is saying that this nutfa, which means a very small drop or something which is a very small volume of fluid of some sort, Allah is saying that it's not just one fluid, it's not just homogeneous fluid. He's saying it's made up of multiple mixtures, mixture upon mixture, because mashid, I think, it just means mixture, but the plural is used here. So it's a multiplicity of mixtures is what makes a nutfa. So that's very interesting, because the ancient views was that your semen is just this homogeneous liquid, and that there's nothing else in it. But Allah is saying that you are made from a drop of that, but actually within that is multiple mixtures. And we can understand this now, because every sperm cell itself has lots of chromosomes. It has lots of different chemical constituents. It has all these things that produce cells. And actually, even the even a single drop has within it many sperm cells. So this is completely true, that we're made from a tiny volume of something which is highly mixed. But the ancient theories did not account for this. Aristotle did not say this. Galen did not say this. That this is new information that the Quran is saying, and it's come true. I can't remember why I put that graphic of DNA, but I'm sure it's linked in some way. As I was saying about the chromosomes and the different mixtures. This may be one of the key meanings, that you have your genetic code and all the chromosomes are mixed together. So that's one meaning of it as well. And the Quran goes on, it says that we turn the, that should say nutfa, actually, that's a bit of a mistake there, should say. Then we fashion the nutfa into an alaqa. Then we fashion the clot, the alaqa, into a shapeless lump, mudgha. Then we fashion bones out of this shapeless lump. Then we clothed the bones with flesh. And if you analyze the words being used here, you find that actually they're of extreme accuracy and specificity. The stage after the zygote, after that second nutfa, the zygote, which the stage after that, which is the alaqa, is something, the Arabic word means something which clings tightly, and it can also be used for a clot. And you find that actually the blood system starts to form at this stage, and it clings very, very tightly to the uterus lining. And then when you look at a mudgha, it means kind of a shapeless lump. It means a lump of flesh which is not really flesh yet. You see that after this stage of the alaqa, you have a stage of the beginnings of development. Your organ tissue starts to develop, but nothing has really taken form yet. And it's only after this that you start to have a skeleton being produced, first in a cartilage way and then in a completely ossified way. And that starts, and then you have the flesh, which is the kind of muscle and fat goes on beyond that, and it clothes and it wraps around the skeleton. So this has been proved again completely true, and we've analyzed what Galen said, what Aristotle says, and it's completely different. The Quran has multiple differences from those authors, from those ancient scholars. So this is one stage. That's basically I think the mudghah stage. And then it says we developed that fetus into another creation, or the embryo into another creation. So blessed is Allah, the best of creators. And this refers to our spiritual self, that our soul is born after a series of developmental stages. And then ultimately produces children, so that we can do our namaz and fulfill the purpose of our creation. And when we look at these verses, that should remind us, these verses have been given to us, and there are spiritual meanings within all of these physical phenomena, especially in Surah Al-Mu'minun in this chapter. But ultimately, God has gone through this enormous process of developing us, creating the universe, creating the earth, creating life, developing us in the womb, ultimately so we can have nearness to Him and we can concentrate on Him. So how much more is the responsibility on us to focus on that and to make sure that we pay our dues to God Almighty? And I'll just finish on this excellent quote from Keith Moore. He is one of the most renowned embryologists of the modern era. He wrote one of the main textbooks called Clinically Oriented Embryology. He's not a Muslim. I think he's a Christian. I don't think he ever formally converted to Islam, but I might be wrong. It's not entirely clear publicly. But this is what he said about this, because he read what the Quran said and he analyzed it. And he said the interpretation of the verses in the Quran referring to human development would not have been possible in the 7th century AD or even 100 years ago. We can interpret them now because the science of modern embryology affords us new understanding. Undoubtedly, there are other verses in the Quran related to human development that will be understood in the future as our knowledge increases. Inshallah, that will indeed happen. And it's already started to happen. So, he himself is like one of the world leading authorities in embryology. And he's saying that what the Quran says would not have been possible in the 7th century. Or even 100 years ago. So this is, again, evidence that actually the Holy Quran is a proof of God in itself. And, in this age when science is related to atheism and when atheists use science as their backup, Allah has prepared us in this way that He has described all these natural phenomena with accuracy and specificity such that we can say that this book must have been from God. So I think this is a very profound proof the more that we reflect upon it. And it's something that we have more work to do to understand it. So I think I'll leave it there. Jazakallah for listening. As I say, we have articles on many of these different things, and we have a massive new article coming out soon on embryology, inshallah. It's about 60 pages, so it's going to be a whole resource. So please do look out for that. Probably in 1 or 2 months that'll be out. But I'll stop there, and I think we'll go to questions. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, Mursab. That was a very interesting session. We're going to start by basically, I'm going to be your moderator for your question and answers. And just wanted to say that, do send in your questions. There's a few coming through. You can either send it through the chat or just raise your hand and I can unmute you and then we can start. So, Vesab, you raised your hand, so I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and please ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum.
My
question is, all the theories about the evolution and the start of the universe that you have mentioned from the Holy Quran, which really makes sense to me, of course. But my question is that why, when discoveries are done, any scientific discovery is done, and later our ulama, in general ulama, find it out from Quran. So if everything what you have said is already pre-mentioned in the Quran, why Muslims were not basically the initiators who would have told the world what is the evolution and what are the different discoveries are like, or life in the other planets, or space, or whatever discoveries are? Why all practical stuff and all the theories are coming basically proven by the Europeans or non-Muslims, and why not Muslims if everything is in the Quran?
Well, you made an assumption there, which is that the Muslims never spoke about these things, which is false. The Muslims did speak about this. So Hazrat Imam Ghazali.
Not only this one, but in general, whatever discovery comes up to be, I have seen from the different non-MD background, I can tell the ulemas and the lots of different sects, they talk about discoveries. Like if you take the example of Dr. Zakir Naik, so everything what he proves scientifically from Quran basically are something that have been proven by the non-Muslims. So my question is just a humble question that, if all things have been already proven in the Quran, then why the Muslims were not the one who discovered all these things or theories, what we study in our
Because
science now?
so okay, sure, I'll answer that if that's okay. So because these are two completely different questions. So there are two things here. One is there's an assumption that the Muslims never spoke about these things, which is again not true. There are many different imams of old who said that the universe had a beginning, and they said that they were very annoyed at Muslims who said that the universe has always existed, and they very much argued against them. Hazrat Imam Ghazali was one of them. And in fact, the promised Messiah, again, this was before the Big Bang, he very clearly used this verse in particular and said that therefore the universe came from a type of something small and enclosed. And I can't remember the exact Urdu that he used, but we should actually translate that and put that out there, because he very clearly said from this verse he reasoned that the universe began from this. And again, as I've said, the evolution was spoken about by Muslims first, and European authorities themselves said this. But that's one level. The Muslims did speak about this, and they have always spoken about this. But as for the discoveries of them, that is a different thing. That's a completely much more involved process, because that requires a certain competence in your scientific level. You know, let's say there was a Muslim theologian 1,000 years ago who said, "Yeah, I think the universe came from a closed mass based on this verse." How is he going to prove that? We've only been able to prove that in the last 100 years. He would have to overthrow geocentricity of the universe. He would have to invent telescopes. He would have to invent very advanced telescopes. He would have to be able to measure background radiation of the universe, have to be able to see how the universe is expanding, invent completely new forms of mathematics in order to prove these things. You know, the amount of work that you'd have to do, there's a reason it's taken thousands of years. And the Muslims played their part. They contributed to the scientific progress, but it was in this modern civilization. It was only in the very, very recent past, only in the last 100 years, that science got to a point where you were able to investigate these things in depth. There is a necessary level of science and technology that is needed before you can start to probe the, have microscopes and be able to have a look at embryos and be able to do imaging scans and these kinds of things. To say that the Muslims 1,000 years ago should have discovered this stuff, it holds no water, because, you know, the question of whether the Quran is describing these things accurately is something completely unrelated as to whether Muslims 1,000 years ago could have actually discovered this through their own independent research. So I think those are two separate things. But it's obviously for Muslims now. And then the second element of this is that in some respects it's difficult to really your ability to imagine is often constrained by your existing way of looking at things. So if you have we all have models of the world, whether we realize it or not. We all have a way that we think things are. And actually the reality, the ultimate truth of things may be actually quite different. But when we're reading these verses, we may not be able to appreciate what they're really saying and be able to take things in their literal sense and be able to really understand what they're saying, because we have our own models of how the world should be. So we often are blind to these aspects. So the Quran is also like that in some respects, because it's saying things, but you can kind of look over them. You can say, well, this must be metaphorical in some way, or I don't really understand this. Or maybe it's capable of one or two interpretations and you're not sure, you know, maybe both of them don't quite make sense to you. But in order to actually confirm that actually what the Quran is saying is actually literally true, requires a huge amount of work and a huge amount of investigation to explore. And it's only once you've done that work and you've looked at things and you've imaged things and you've looked at things in microscopes and Einstein's done his equations and, you know, you've had a look at the background radiation of the universe, that you can really appreciate, even in your imagination, how things actually are and what the reality is. And then when you look at the Quran, you're looking at it with new eyes and you realize, oh, this is what God was talking about. So I think it's the question of why, you know, Muslims have not discovered this. It's a false premise. Muslims have talked about this and they've advanced a lot of these sciences. But that's different to the question of whether the Quran, you can use this as evidence of the divine origin of the Quran. You can use it as evidence for the divine origin of the Quran. And obviously it's on us as Ahmadi Muslims to be taking this forward now, to be saying, well, why don't we look at the Quran with those fresh eyes, with this realization that actually sometimes we are constrained by the existing knowledge, and say, okay, well, why don't I take this verse and now push it forward. And in that article about Bang Cosmology, we talked about some ways to do that, about the end of the universe. What would the physical science, what would have to be the reality of dark energy and other things in relation to the expansion of the universe for the universe to collapse back in on itself? And maybe if you say, well, my hypothesis is that the universe is going to collapse in on itself and produce something new, maybe if you do that and you say what would have to be true, then actually you're going to make some progress in science. So I appreciate the point you're making. It's a very good question, and I appreciate that. I agree with the spirit of it, which is that we need to be using the Quran to be pushing science forward now. But as I say, there are we can be somewhat limited by our imagination in some respects.
That was a very good question. Can I get the Ms. Famida Saiba to ask a question, please?
Assalamualaikum. The scientists say, can you hear me?
Yep.
The scientists say that in embryology, the Holy Quran, Nazbillah, is not correct in saying that the bones are formed before the flesh is wrapped around them, and they say rather that everything is formed simultaneously. So how should that be replied to?
The scientists don't really say that. It's the atheist apologists who say that, and they're wrong because they haven't actually looked at the verse of the Quran properly. What the Quran says is that the bones are clothed with flesh. It does not say that the flesh is created after the bones start to form or are formed. It says that they are clothed with flesh. So it's saying that once the skeleton starts to take form, it's after that you have a process of clothing, and clothing means multiple layers. And this is what happens. You have the multiple layers of muscles. And it's called, we have primary myogenesis and we have secondary myogenesis. And both of them have to happen in order for the skeleton to be clothed. So if you look at the timings of these things, the Quran is correct in this respect. But this is something we cover in our article on embryology that's going to be coming out in 2 to 3 months or so, probably, inshallah. So hopefully that will go into more detail.
Right, Jazakallah for that, myself. There's quite a few questions coming in, so we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. The next question I'm going to ask is from Imran Saab. He's saying that are humans at the peak of their evolution, or will we still continue to evolve into the future?
Humans can be at the depth of evolution in some respects, because it's through our spiritual and moral conduct that we really become truly human or truly inhuman. So it depends how we use our faculties. If we are like the prophets or like their companions, and we truly use our capacities in the best way possible, then our evolution will be a spiritual evolution towards an infinite God. So it's unlimited in that respect. If, however, we don't use our faculties correctly and we act in an inhumane and bestial way, then not only are we not evolving, but we're actually devolving in a true sense. So our evolution is primarily spiritual. We have reached a level where we can have that spiritual evolution, and when we die, our souls will live on according to Islam, and we will have unending spiritual evolution in that respect. Now, the Quran does also hint towards that there may be physical evolution as well. After human civilization is largely wiped out, maybe in 1,000 years, 1,500 years, when this cycle of humanity comes to an end, God may take the remnant of humans and evolve them into a different form. And Khalifa Rabi speaks about this in Revelation, Rationality, Knowledge, and Truth. There's a chapter on this. I think it's called The Future of Life on Earth, I think. So you can read more about that there. And I would say pretty much everything we've said in this presentation and that we've written about really completely owes a massive debt to Khalifa Rabi, who was the pioneer in these respects. And all we can now do is just show that he has continued to be proven right, and that there is now modern scientific evidence, even more modern than the last 20 years, which has forwarded these arguments.
Perfect. Do you know what? The next question that we got is actually quite, I think we all think about that a lot. And it's basically saying that, if there is God, then why can't we see him? Wouldn't it just make things easier if God just showed himself and proved to people that, look, I exist and I've created all of you, and just do what I command of you? Well,
God does show himself in a respect, in the sense that he manifests his attributes. sometimes visibly, sometimes in our own selves. If God, if he shows us a vision and he shows us something in that way, then he has manifested himself to us. He may not show himself because he's not a physical being like you or me. Any representation is going to be limited, so he can't represent himself in a physical way, in the way that we think about things. He's an infinite, immaterial being, but he can manifest his attributes and manifest himself in signs. And he can do that visually, he can do that to the eyes of our souls when we have visions or true dreams. He can do that audibly when we hear God and we hear revelation. Or he can do that even to our physical eyes and our physical ears when we hear the revelation of God in the Holy Quran, or when we see the signs of God coming true, when there are prophecies made, be it about World War I by the promised Messiah, when we see various prophecies of the Holy Quran coming true, when we saw the whole Jamaat witness what happened to Zia al-Haq after Khalifa Rabi issued his Mubahala. These are signs of God that are visible in this world. So, in that sense, the attributes of God are visible and we can see them. But as to why doesn't God come down, it's because God isn't that kind of being. Moreover, were he to manifest himself in that way, in such a incredibly obvious representation, there'd be no test. There has to be an element of work that you have to put in. There has to be some effort that you put in. You have to have evidence, but it may not be completely binding evidence. It could be evidence that to you is maybe 80% true, 90% true, and Allah wants you to have the humility to accept that actually this thing, i.e. the existence of God and the truth of Islam, is very likely to be true as I see it at my level. I think it's very likely to be true. Now, at that point, do I turn away from it because I'm not 100% sure? Or do I say, actually, with humility, maybe if I continue down this path, I will have certainty? And the Prophet said you need to have that element of faith, of iman, in what you can't yet see, a belief in the unseen. So you need to have that faith in what's coming. And it's not blind faith. It's not what sort of many Christians say, which is about having blind faith. It's about, belief on the basis of evidence. So you have your evidence, but you don't have complete certainty. But Allah wants that small element of doubt because that's, part of the test. So it's when you actually say, okay, well, I'm going to go forward and I'm going to do the spiritual practices that the prophets did, and I'm going to do my namaz, and I'm going to go to the mosque, and I'm going to be a good person and follow the teachings of Islam. Then you start to witness God in your own life, and you have much greater certainty of God's existence. So that is the way that you can see God even in this life.
That was actually very beautifully put, because it's simple, really, isn't it? If you want to see God, all you got to have is truth and justice in your heart. Just be truthful to yourself, and if you truthfully seeking the answers, you will find them. Jazakallah myself for the beautiful talk and for the questions that you've answered. It was beautifully answered. I just want to say Jazakallah to everyone that has joined. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We do this every week. So today's was English. Next week, Sunday, is going to be in Urdu, and then following week is going to be in English as well. So we do ask that please, join next week as well, and put this in your diaries, and come prepared with questions if you have any questions that you want to ask. So Jazakallah everyone for joining tonight, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah.